The first thing that comes to mind actually is wife and mother, because that's the most important thing in my life in terms of who I am. Leader, I guess, would be next, because that's the role I serve every day in terms of what I do. I think if I have to define who I am, I guess those are the three main things that define that. For me as a person, an individual, it's kind of a introvert, extrovert. I do the things I do, but I like quiet me and quiet time. I like to be reflective. I like to look at the world from the outside and how it affects my life as a leader on the inside in terms of what matters to me. I think that kind of sums me up, I guess. I grew up in a little town south of Cleveland and Akron, Ohio. It was a pretty segregated city. My dad was a civil rights activist and believed, even in his little world, that he had to do what he could. So he bought land in a part of Massillon that we did not live. Matter of fact, the deed on that property still says that Negroes may not buy this land. He bought it anyway. He had to go to the state of New York to get a loan. He had to find a builder from out of town to come build it because he couldn't find anybody who would even build on the land for him in this neighborhood. That man, I can't remember his name right now, but I can remember him telling Dad about the death threats he got if he actually built that house. Mr. Martin, John Martin, that's right. But he built it anyway, and we moved into our neighborhood. The night we moved in, my dad, I was in the third grade, I was going into the third grade into a brand new school, and I remember him carrying this Winchester rifle, which I still have, and he stood in front of our house at that front door holding that Winchester rifle all night. And I can remember hearing cars, the Hood family for one of all names, going up and down the street, calling him every name under the sun. He stood there because he was going to protect his family. And I think for me, just that vision of him doing that and knowing we would be safe, and of course then I was going to have to go to school. My sisters were not in school the next day by myself, was something his strength, I think, gave me strength to do what I needed to do. He was very involved in the Urban League. He was called Mr. Urban League at one point in terms of what he did. Everybody in the community knew my dad. Nobody ever visited our house much in that part of town. And he was rather a dynamic person. He was the first black man to join the Knights of Columbus, which is unheard of, and reach whatever degree level that he did. He was the highest to do that as well. But that faith and that feeling that it's important to give yourself away and give of yourself is kind of the mantra that I live by, and I think it's one that he lived by also. I'm comfortable in environments where it's going to be difficult. It doesn't always feel good, but I think because of what he went through and what he survived, that I know that I can go through whatever I need to go through to do the right thing and survive. My career was maybe not the normal route people would take. So my very first job, my first career was I was a high school teacher. I was in graduate school. We got married between my graduate school year and moved to Kent, Ohio. And so I taught for a year, which is when I learned that teaching was actually not for me. So I commend and applaud all the teachers. My son is a high school teacher. This is going to sound strange. I was outstanding freshman woman. I can't exactly remember how that happened necessarily. I've always been able to speak. I learned debate when I was a freshman in college in some of my communications classes. I was a communications drama major to start with. And the ability to debate helped me. And I will tell you, being a debater and then teaching debate when I taught high school for the 1 year I taught high school, teaches you the importance and significance of understanding the other side. And I think that's something as black people, I think we're natural debaters. If we're going to survive in an environment, it is important to understand the other side because you can't fight the other side unless you know it. I used to, until he got too awful, in the mornings on the way to work when I would drive downtown, listen to Rush Limbaugh. My husband would say, "Why do you listen to that?" one, I knew it was an act, but I also knew because I wanted to understand the way his mind thinks, because the men I work with every day, that's part of their mindset. So for me, understanding that mindset and listening to the rationale that they use for what they believe helps me to form my rationale to fight it. So that seems like the logical thing to do. But I can remember these two white guys knocking on my door, junior year, senior year, saying, we want to run for student body office and we're trying to get a ticket together. We want you to be on the ticket for vice president. And we're going to find somebody else. We got somebody running for secretary. So it's these three white guys and me running for office. I can remember after we did that, we had our campaign posters up everywhere. One of the guys, Tom, came to the door one night and said, something we got to tell you. Both came, something we got to tell you. We don't know how to say it, but we want you to feel okay. But when you go out on campus, you're liable to see something that we're not sure you're going to be comfortable with. I said, well, what's the matter? He said, well, your opponent has signs all over campus that say, don't vote for the nigger. I said, oh, okay. They would say, be calm, it's okay. By this time, my background is, I said, well, you know what, that's his problem. I can't, that's the way he feels, that's fine. I'm not going to let that get in the way of what I have to do to run for office. We're just going to work harder to win. So if that's the way he wants to handle his campaign, nothing we can do about it. You all need not be upset. I appreciate your concern, but we're going to be all right. Long story short, we won that election. Now, here's the thing. He was running for president. I was running for a slot for vice president. He won for president. I won for vice president. Okay. So I said, well, here's a dilemma. Now I have to live with this. Well, it turned out, as they counted the votes, he had cheated on the ballots. He had cheated with his grade point average. The university kicked him out of his office, and the guy who ran with me ended up winning the office. So in the end, I think that kind of showed us that crime doesn't pay. But that experience of not using what you had, what you saw, and what other people did to frighten you away from an experience. I guess, I hadn't thought about this. I guess that takes me back to that dad with the rifle. Not letting that experience stop you from what you want to do. When I faced a similar type experience in college, it just gave me more ammunition to do it. I taught for a year while I was finishing getting my master's. My master's is in student personnel administration. And once I finished that, I actually worked at Kent State University in the financial aids department. I was there for a year and moved to manage the Upward Bound program. Upward Bound is an incredible program for high school students to prepare them and get them ready for college. So when I took that position, and there's a method to this madness of explaining my career, after I got the job, they told me that the program was in financial jeopardy, that the previous directors something had gone wrong, and that the program was in a hole and needed to be totally revamped. So I had not revamped a program before. So I went into that knowing that I had to restructure, change the program, meet with the feds, go to meetings, try and get all the financials squared away, and work to try and put the program in a better spot. We did get the program in a much better place. I had a great team of people that I hired to work with me. One of my Upward Bound students who we convinced to go to high school and to move on to college is now a judge in Akron. And I ran into her when I went to Akron to give a speech. She's a Delta, and she became a sitting court judge and still is. And I'm just so very proud and realize what you can do and the difference you make in the lives of children. Where I wasn't good as a high school teacher. I was probably okay as a high school teacher, but the program that I really needed to be in was in fact that one that allowed people to change. And my first job in Georgia was again in higher ed, and I worked at Georgia State University. While I was there, we realized that we needed a student activities department. I ended up starting the student activities department under the Student Affairs Department at Georgia State as an assistant dean. So I went in and restructured and changed the way we did that operation in terms of the way it worked. Similar type function that I had when I was at Kent State. While I was at Georgia State, I ran into one of the students there. Georgia State has lots of professional programs. The human resources director for Southern Bell was also there and saw my work. I worked with Mike Meska on there, and Mike said, you really shouldn't be in education. You really need to move to the business world because that's where you belong. Didn't think a whole lot about that until I ran into the guy who was the director for HR at Southern Bell, and he saw me change and restructure that program. He said, we have some work we need to do at Southern Bell. I'd like you to come and work for Southern Bell and help us look at how to fix a particular part of our business that we have. And at Southern Bell, they wanted me to work with systems technicians. Now that's a whole nother story. Now Southern Bell back in the day, okay, so this is in the 70s, was not as progressive as places are today. And the department that I was in, which is the one that does telephone repair, was mostly white men and mostly union officials. My job was to try and find out why customer service took such a hit in that part of the business, particularly on full moons. By the way, customer service rates and negative rates go up when there's a full moon. I found that out. He said there's something wrong in terms of our systems technicians when they go in a business customer climate that isn't right. And so we want you to come in and see if you can't find a way to help us figure out what the problem is. Again, a totally foreign environment to me, but the job was the same, to go in and try and determine what is wrong with a business operation and how do you fix it. So I will tell a story with this. I ran into one of the men I worked for. I worked for the vice president, but I was in a department and I worked for Mr. Spruill. Mr. Spruill was a Southern gentleman, white guy, all white male team for the most part, except some of the staff. And he came over to me one day. I'm figuring out how to fix out this problem with business technicians. So I'm riding on trucks because I want to understand what they do. Now, they did not want a black female riding on their truck, so I got to go visit the tallow factory. I don't know if you know what a tallow factory is, but that's where they take dead horses and make wax. The worst places they could think of to go is where I would go. I'd have to go visit union halls. And I did not find out till years later when we implemented this project that I'm telling you about, that the two of the white guys I worked with, he said, you remember when we took you to those union halls in South Georgia? I said, yeah. I said, you know, but it turned out okay because they were pretty good. You know, they didn't give me a hard time. That's because we called them ahead of time and said, we're carrying, and she's working for the vice president. So if there's any trouble and we have to pull out the guns, we will. You know, I didn't know that till years later, but that explained a lot of things. So anyway, back to Mr. Spruill. So Mr. Spruill came over to my desk one day. Now, mind you, I'm used to a big office for an assistant dean at Georgia State, which was very nice. I got this little cubicle. And he says, you know what, Miss Smith, Beverly? I am so happy. I said, what is it, Mr. Spruill? He said, I don't see you as black anymore. So I'm thinking to myself, I can take this a whole lot of ways. I went back to my debate days and said to myself, let me real quickly in my head run through Mr. Spruill's baggage. He's from the Deep South. He's from South Georgia. He's been in this environment forever. He works with white males who climb poles, telephone poles. They don't want any black folks around, and they'll deal with black folks. I had one of my staff tell me that. They don't want any women for sure. And so quickly I had to understand how important it was for him to get over that hurdle. And he got over it. So my response back to Mr. Spruill was, I am so glad that you're able to get past that and that we're going to be able to work together. I was glad for myself because I knew I was going to keep a job without any trouble. You know, that goes through your head too. But my response to him had to be something that didn't scare him, okay? Or make him feel offended, because we had a bigger mission than the relationship we had to deal with. What I did at Southern Bell was create a program where systems technicians changed their approach to the way they handle their customer service in terms of what they did. We called it Project Update. We trialed it in Georgia. It went well. Our customer service ratings went up. It meant systems technicians had to dress a little differently. They put their tool belt in when they went to businesses. This is business technicians in a business case. We had a business case designed for them to put their tools in so they didn't drag the tool belts all over everybody's desk. We did some training on how to handle customers for guys who weren't used to that approach. This is why I had to go meet with the unions, because we had to get union buy-in for that to happen. So we were able to change that scenario so well that, to make a very long story short, the program went national. We not only adopted it in Southern Bell, but it was adopted in all of the Bell System companies across the country. So I felt very good about the fact that we were able to do that. The other thing I learned in my 16 years while I was there, and I did have the opportunity to move up, is the importance of relationships and being heard. It is important that if you have a mission or a goal, that you find a way to be heard until your voice can be singularly your own. I can remember a business meeting when we were meeting with the leadership at Southern Bell and the union, and I was there because of the program I had been doing. We'd sit in this room and they'd go through all the things we needed to do. I'd say something, offer a suggestion. They'd listen to it and keep going. The head of the union who was sitting next to me would say something. They'd pay great attention to it and say, that's a great idea. So, I'm getting frustrated, right? So I finally said to him, look, clearly they're not going to listen to the little black girl sitting at the table, but they're going to listen to you. So I've got some good ideas. I'm going to feed them to you and write you some notes and some things to suggest. And let's see if your ideas will sell, even when mine won't. We did that for the rest of the meeting, and every great idea that he had that came out of my head, they bought. So the goal was there. But what happened later was when an issue came up and it came up for me to need support for a project, who do you think was the first on my side? The union that I had issues with supported me because my focus was on where we need to go. I knew my day and my voice would get heard, but I had to find a way to funnel my voice, and so I did it through that table, and that means my dad did that same thing in the community. In the Urban League he worked with, those white guys that he worked with sometimes get the message across until his voice became the credible voice in terms of what we were doing. There's a saying that says, in the midst of a crisis, those who you can panic, you can have a difficult time, you can worry. However, if you focus on God and He tells you to go with the flow, then that's what you'll do. You'll go with the flow. And I think my faith in who we are, in what we can do, in the creativity of Black people, I'm going to come back to that in a second, really keeps you through. It's very pressure driven. There have been many times when I haven't had a lot of sleep, but I think that goes with leadership in general. I have had to make decisions very quickly, and I'm very comfortable with using my gut to make decisions. I think that's something that a good leader has to do. You have to use rational judgment, but you have to be a decision maker that does not ponder decisions long. You have to think of what's most important. At that convention, for example, the most important thing was the safety of the people. I knew I had to worry about the financials. The financials worked out. But the most important thing, and that's where you have to put your head, what's the most important thing that you have to work on in a crisis? Where do you want to come in the end out of a crisis? What things can you try and manage and focus on and work your way through? It does require you to think on your feet. I do think my background and experience helped me with that in terms of trying to make those kinds of decisions and being comfortable. You just got to get out there and do it. You can't hesitate. You can't wait. You have to make a decision based on what you feel is right so that you can sleep at night. And I think bottom line is that's what it is. Leadership is never easy, no matter how large or small the organization. The decisions you have to make regardless of size are the same. If I sat and pondered and worried about the fact that there's 23,000 people out there waiting for me to make some kind of decision versus the fact that I really have to make a decision for the good of the organization, that's where my focus has to be. And you live with being able to explain the decisions that you have and not the audience in front of you. I'd say even for a small business owner, this crisis has been as difficult, more difficult than it is for those who are in a big organization. It's not the easiest, but you have to be reliant on the team. It is all about the team. It is never about the leader. If you make something about yourself as a leader, then you're missing the point. If you are not growing that team that you have, if you're not putting the right people on the right seat in the bus, then your leadership is going to be very difficult. I am very blessed to have been able to put the right people on the right seats in Delta's leadership bus in my appointments, and I think that has been everything. Lead 360 allows you to get those opportunities, take full advantage of them when you have them, and then lead.